Thank you, Johnny. Pleasure to be on your show today. Doing wonderful.
Excellent. Now, you are a very interesting guy, and I have to start off with the question that I will always ask members or former members of the CIA. I might have a slip of the tongue there. Firstly, how do you respond to people who say, once the CIA, always the CIA?
Well, I mean, there is an element of truth to the career CIA officers who basically just go up the ranks and eventually retire and remain as a contractor who will do additional contract work as an annuitant, pension, so forth. So those kind of people have a vested interest because they go through their background checks. They got to have their security clearance. So they have to basically toe the company line, as they say in slang, which is be part of the group and, protect the organization, be a good bureaucrat. But keep in mind, not everyone follows that career path. There are people who basically get fed up of being a bureaucrat in a big bureaucracy, because that's basically what it is, and bail, and they're out, and they actually may be activists at exposing some of the bad that the CIA does. So just because you work for the CIA does not make you a always be a CIA officer who will always defend the agency.
Yeah, yeah, I understand that. I always got to ask it. It's a very interesting. It's very interesting to see people's responses, and I think people's responses always give a little bit of a clue to who their true allegiances are. Where their true allegiances are, and that makes a lot of sense. What you say, I don't tar everybody with the brush, but it's very interesting, especially for me, because I do so much work into looking into previous CIA operations, members of the CIA, and how they've interacted with society, sometimes very negatively, sometimes with an idea of patriotism at heart. How did you first get recruited by the CIA? What was that process like?
I ended up finishing my higher education, Bachelor of Arts degree, double major political science, international relations, a little late in life, in my early 30s, because I worked full time in the commodities, the perishable commodities industry in Miami, Florida. But, as I was going through my undergraduate studies near the end, CIA overt recruiters, affiliated with the CIA, because there's different recruiting elements of the CIA. These particular overt would go out to universities and seek to recruit students to work for the CIA, particularly for the Director of Intelligence. So that's how I got into the CIA. Basically, attended a recruitment session, had an interview with Director of Intelligence recruiters, and they offered me a graduate fellowship so that I can continue graduate studies and work as a temporary employee as a graduate, and eventually that would be converted into a staff employee job.
So I mean, that sounds like a very, because it's something I come across a lot, is that, the CIA recruit in schools, colleges, usually looking for young, talented people who have got a lot, who have got high scores in every aspect. Are they very overt when they're doing this sort of recruitment? Are they honest about who they are, where they work for, and what they want you for?
In this particular instance, I can say absolutely yes from these senior director of intelligence officers. It actually rose up the rank. I believe one of them became close to a very high level DI officer. They're very frank, very straightforward. This is what we're looking for. We see this in you. We like this in you. What do you think about it? This is the kind of work you'll be doing. On top of that, once you get a conditional offer, you actually have an opportunity to go up to the CIA during your background, polygraph, to visit the CIA headquarters and go into the office that is going to bring you on board, so you can see what they do. So you have an opportunity in this particular case to make sure it's the right fit. Now, I mean, this is just for my entrance to the CIA as a intelligence analyst type officer. Because keep in mind that there are different type of employees. You've got the clandestine, covert employees that are never affiliated with the CIA because they're undercover. Eventually, I would do that, but that recruitment process is totally different. And you really, in some ways, may not necessarily know what you're getting into if you're particularly going the covert route. Even more so if you're going into the non-official cover, where you may have some kind of business cover or some other kind of cover. Those may be totally just, I mean, very difficult type jobs.
Yeah, most definitely. I bet. I mean, I can imagine that the style of employment and employment techniques are different to everybody who's involved. I got a first question from the chat. Someone's asked. Truth Will Out has asked, Johnny, please ask Pedro if he's familiar with Larry C. Johnson and Ray McGovern, and if not, why not?
I'm a little familiar with Ray McGovern because I am part of a group that he leads. It's the Veterans for Intelligence Sanity. So we every once in a while have some dialogue. We do some memos, particularly most recently on the Ukraine. So yes, a little bit familiar with him. But Larry Johnson, not as much. Although, I mean, I know that there's quite a bit of writing out there about him. And I need to do some of my research on Larry Johnson to really get more details on him.
Well, there's a lot of people who have been employed by the CIA over time. I mean, it's a massive agency, and I'm sure there's a lot of varying members or varying characters in that members. So how long did you work for the CIA? Before we get to the book you've also written, how long did you work for the CIA before you started to realize that they're not necessarily working in the best interest of Americans?
Well, didn't take long. I mean, within basically a year, it's like, wait a moment, what have I gotten myself into? This is just another bureaucracy. And, this
Mm.
bureaucracy will eat you alive to protect itself. And, I managed to find a way out of that office, go into another office, things went well. And then again, it's like, whoa, wait a moment. I remembered Admiral Rickover, who says, if you're ever going to sin against God, God will forgive you, but never sin against the bureaucracy because I'll never forgive you. That became evident to me early on in my career. And eventually what would happen is down the road, I would see it over and over and over again. I had great opportunities where I saw great work, but then I saw some things I really had no choice but to speak up. So it all basically within, my first 8, 9 years, I had one tour in one station that I call it Potemkin Station in my book because it was a station in name only. We had what I call just it was a three clown show. I named the chief of station, deputy chief of station, and the cops. Mo, Larry, and Curly for the Three Stooges because that's how bad it was. Uh, it's sadly, we do have bad officers, but we do have a lot of good officers as well that are employed within the federal government and for that matter in the intelligence community.
Yeah, man, it's a I will ask you a question from the chat. There's one from Joel Allen, but I'll do it just after we've probably just after the break. Let's listen. You've written The Broken Whistle, a Deep State Run Amok. Give us an idea what the book's about and why you decided to write it.
Well, they say you have whistleblower protections, and by law, you are required to report wrongdoing and violations of laws, abuses of power, fraud, waste, significant and specific endangerment to public safety. I did. And not only did I do so, but I did it with the what's known as the authorized channels, authorized officials, authorized disclosures. And what I found out was that the system is hell bent on destroying the whistleblower. So therefore, the whistle is broken. And ultimately, what happens here is not only that I blow the whistle, but eventually I would begin to blow the whistle on the broken whistle to high level officials. I'm talking about Director of Central Intelligence Agency Pompeo, Director of National Intelligence Daniel Coates, going to Congress, and other senior level officials, and nobody did anything about it except allow the CIA Office of Security to come after me like basically a mafia hit crew to take me out. And take me out is exactly what they did. They basically murdered me alive by, taking my clearance away and firing me.
Yeah. Now, this is a perfect time to ask the question from the chat just before we go to a news break. Joel Allen asked, in your opinion, who was the most honest and clean CIA director of the CIA?
Well, from 2000 until 2019, within the time frame that I worked, I was most impressed actually with Leon Panetta.
Hmm.
I was able to interact with a few directors in one way or another. And Leon, I was able to sit down and have a dinner with him one time when I was out in the war zone. And he was first and foremost a politician, but he was a congressman. And you do have a lot of congressmen who realize that the bottom line is, you're in it for your constituents. So he understood that he was there not just to represent the agency, but he was there for the employees of the agency. So he, deep in his heart, he really took an interest in the people of the CIA. I would call
Mhm.
him the best of all directors that I ran into.
I find that very interesting. He's someone who came up in one of my articles when I was researching Stanley Pottinger and how he ended up getting recruited by the CIA. And it was Leon Panetta who got outed in a certain government department in 1970 and pushed out, and then replaced with this guy, Stanley Pottinger. Now, is it normal? Do you think that a lot of these positions of power are filled up by people who are CIA or people who are potentially recruited later on down the line by the CIA?
Well, I mean, what happens here is it is a presidentially appointed Senate confirmed position. So you've got
Mhm.
two dynamics. One is the president would like to nominate someone to be in charge, but he has to get that person through the Senate confirmation process. And, there's a lot of politics involved. Who can a president nominate who is going to be able to survive the confirmation process and get in there? Uh, Ideally, they want to nominate somebody who's going to be very loyal to the president. Uh, as we've witnessed with Brennan, Brennan was a very powerful CIA director who was very close and loyal to Obama. And they were able to put him through because they basically had the power in the Senate to do so. That's the ideal situation. In other situations, you may end up having a weak CIA leader who is basically uh, incapable of going in and leading the agency, and for that matter, trying to reform the agency. And one name that comes to my mind is Porter Goss. Porter Goss was a former member of the House Permanent Select Committee of Intelligence who was nominated as the CIA director. And he was a very weak leader who basically the CIA found a way to chase him out and, eventually through the leaks, embarrassed him. And he was forced to basically quit early.
Yeah, there's a lot of there's a lot of chasing out in the CIA. Listen, so I have another question from the chat for you, Pedro. Dark Commission asked, considering all of the very nefarious actions of the CIA over many decades, there's been a few, just what sort of person would consider joining the CIA?
It goes back to what you're going to do at the CIA. If you're going to be an analyst, you really need to be able to be a deep analytical thinker who likes to research and write, and in some cases who can sit behind a desk and have no interaction with people other than when you have to do a briefing or present your paper or make a case for your analytical judgments. But then if you're going to be an operative out in the street, out and about in dangerous places, it takes a wholly, totally different type of person to be in that job. And if you're going to be one of those case officers, operations officer who's going to be handling human assets, I mean, in some cases, you could be a narcissist who is very manipulative. And that's why we end up having a lot of issues with CIA officers who worked in the operations environment. They're basically their brains can get completely rewired. I mean, you're
Mm.
basically doing criminal acts to entice other nations' leaders, perhaps, or for that matter, bureaucrats, to steal information and provide secrets. So I mean, these are criminal acts. So unfortunately, what happens here is if you don't have a strong moral foundation of knowing when to draw that line, you have cases of CIA operations officer that pick up these criminal tendencies and they start manipulating their own employees, their own superiors, Congress, even the presidential administration, or their own family members. So
Yeah.
this is where the concept of one CIA always CIA comes in and becomes a factor as well. But that doesn't apply to every CIA officer because you've got analysts, you've got technical officers, engineers, and you also have administrative type, financial, logistics, and it's totally different. It's relevant to your career path that you're taking.
Yeah, yeah, no, I understand that definitely, and those when I'm looking for people who work for the CIA who've done nefarious stuff, I'm usually coming at it through a route of the nefarious, investigating that, and then discovering someone is a member of the CIA who's been involved in it. So it usually takes, it can give you a false representation of what the whole body is doing, and I do understand that not everybody who works for such an organization is acting without the best interests of other people. A lot of people think they're acting in the best interest, whether they are or not. That's all dependent on what comes out the other side. What do you intend to achieve by blowing the whistle?
Well, bottom line, the whistle is broken, and the ability of any intelligence community employee, for that matter, CIA specifically in my case, or any other CIA whistleblower, to report wrongdoing and for that wrongdoing to be appropriately dealt with, taken care of, and the employee not suffering reprisal, that process is totally broken. So what happens here is if you don't have a level of you got to have a level of transparency, you got to have a level of accountability. If not, you risk having national security disasters. The best example, there is a whistleblower out there by the name of John Reedy, and he blew the whistle internally on what was a serious deficiency in a program that I don't even know the details, but I know from the press reporting some of the details where lives were at stake, human assets. And instead of, receiving his disclosures, whistleblowing, trying to fix the problem, they decided to take reprisals against him, take his clearance away from him, get him fired as a contractor, and never fix the problem. And the bottom line was, reportedly, perhaps dozens of human assets were rounded up and killed as a result of this failure. Well, if you have a whistleblower process that would have received that disclosure, corrected the problem, perhaps these dozens of assets would never have been killed. And you can fast forward to that was in probably it's somewhere in the time frame of 2007, 2012. I mean, actually, you can go backwards to 9/11, and it's the same thing. Some processes were broken, and some people did speak up. But even though they were blowing the whistle, unfortunately, the system didn't do anything about it, and we had 9/11. And who knows how many other intelligence failures could have been avoided had they heeded the warnings of an officer within one of these agencies.
Yeah, yeah. These agencies are very complex, especially when they're hiding things from each other, and that's part of the process. Is hiding information, or at least not revealing information. It's hard to know who's on what side and who really is acting for what agenda. Can the CIA be reformed? And if someone wants to reform the agency, won't they be found hanging from a tree with a shotgun wound to the chest?
It's a possibility, not physically, but
Mm.
definitely figuratively. Take, for example, General Flynn. General Flynn went in to be the National Security Council director, with the intent of reforming these agencies, and they came out after him with a vengeance and lied about him. You know, they took the FBI investigative report, the interview debrief, and lied about him in that report. And they twisted the facts to basically lie as far as what he said to gain not they didn't convict him, but they indicted him and tried to prosecute him. Eventually, they had to throw the case out because it came out that they lied about him. So that's the biggest problem. These agencies are so powerful that for someone to be able to reform them, how can it be done? It's going to take, there's a couple things. On the presidential side, president is going to have to nominate and get confirmed a strong leader who can go in and make changes. At the same time, it's going to take a complicit and cooperative Congress to be a lever of accountability. And for that matter, both of those have been missing. So what you've had basically a deep state run amok from the perspective of these bureaucrats being able to tell the president what to do and tell Congress go pound sand at times. And that's what needs to be stopped. A president needs to take control of the CIA through a strong director, and Congress needs to take the reins and do their accountability functions of oversight, which has been failing for decades.
Yeah. And that oversight is really hard when you can't see part of the organization, or you're not allowed to see part of the organization. Well, Pedro Israel Orta, you are, thank you so much for being so open and honest and for giving me your time today. You're welcome back on the show another occasion if you do want to come back on, and we can have a further discussion about this, because I have got more questions, and I'm sure my audience also have got a load more questions. I'll be saving them for next time if you promise you'll come back on.
Absolutely. I'll be happy to come back on and answer more questions, John. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.